Our first scripture reading this morning is from Proverbs chapter 4, verses 10 through 12. Listen, my children, take my words to heart, and you will have a long life. We have taught you the way of wisdom, led you on the path of right. If you walk, your steps won't falter. If you run, you won't stumble. Proverbs 10, verses 3 and 4. God doesn't let the just go hungry, but foils the craving of the wicked. An idle hand leads to poverty. The hand of the industrious leads to wealth. From Job, chapter 1, verse 1. Once upon a time, in the land of Uz, there lived a man named Job. Job was honest and upright, revered God, and turned away from evil. Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 12. One day the heavenly court gathered to present themselves before God, and Satan was among them. God said to Satan, "Where have you been?" Satan replied, "Here and there, roaming around the world." God said to Satan, "Have you noticed Job, my faithful one? There's no one on earth like him. He is unlike anyone else in the world, honest and upright, reveres God and turns away from evil." "Yes," Satan answered, "but Job doesn't revere God for no reason. Haven't you put a hedge around him, his household, and everything he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands so much that Job's livestock cover the countryside. But reach out your hand and strike everything he has, and Job will curse you to your face." So God said to Satan, "Very well. Everything Job has is in your hand. Just don't lay a hand on Job himself." Then Satan left God's presence.
Further scriptures this morning, we have several from Ecclesiastes. Chapter 1, verses 12 through chapter 2. Koheleth was a ruler in Jerusalem. "I saw it as my duty, aided by wisdom, to determine all that is accomplished under the sun. What a heavy task God has laid upon us. So now I've seen all the works that have been done under the sun. And let me tell you, everything is but a mist of air, like chasing the wind. For what is crooked can't be straightened, and what is lacking can't be counted." I said to myself, "I have grown wiser than any of my forebears in Jerusalem, and I have expanded my mind immensely in wisdom and understanding." But the more I studied wisdom, and the more I studied madness and foolishness as well, I realized that through it all, I was just chasing the wind. In much wisdom, there is much sorrow. The more you know, the greater your grief. So I said to myself, all right, I'll give myself over to pleasure and see what is good. Alas, I was to find that this too was illusory. Laughter is madness, I concluded, and pleasure is useless. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 12. What I do know is that what is best for us is to be happy and enjoy life as long as we live. And God's gift to us is to eat and drink and find fulfillment in our work. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 14. Be full of joy in the times of prosperity, and in bad times consider this. One is the work of God, the other is two. And because of this, no one can discover the future. Ancient words for our present day consideration.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being willing to listen to all of that scripture reading, we're sort of going through Jewish thought here. And so we wanted to take you through that, and we'll talk about why that was important in a moment. I'm Reverend Carol Johnson. I am the parish associate for spiritual gifts here at St. Andrews. And you're probably wondering where Reverend Rigby is. He conducted a marriage last night in Dallas. And so he is not here with us, and I am thrilled to be with you. I'm also thrilled that although we're not able to be together in person as we love, that because we're using Zoom, we're able to be with people from other cities, other states, and other countries. And their participation has so greatly benefited our community. And we're glad to all be together today. So let's talk about a thorny issue that's been a thorny issue for humankind ever since we had any kind of cognizance of who we are and what happened. And that is, why do bad things happen? And I'd like to use Jewish thought in this. I'd also like to use one of my favorite movies, because I know we can easily get caught up in bad things that are happening to us, and sometimes it's easier to be removed from that. So let's use a movie called Casablanca as an illustration. Now, for those of you who haven't seen Casablanca, let me give you the major characters. There's 5 of them. There's Rick and Ilsa, who are the star-crossed lovers. There's Victor, who is Ilsa's husband, who is a freedom fighter. This all takes place during World War II, 1940, 1941, 1942. The Germans are on the march. And Ilsa's husband has been in a concentration camp because of his work, and she has received word he's dead. And then meets Rick. Now the story starts in Paris, but will move to Casablanca, which is in Morocco. And there's Captain Louis Renault, who's the police captain in Casablanca. And there's Major Heinrich Strasser, who is the German Luftwaffe who chases resistance fighters. So those are our 5 characters. And we start out in Paris, and Ilsa and Rick have met, and they've fallen in love, and it's 1940, and the Germans are just outside of Paris, and they're going to take the city. And Ilsa and Rick decide to meet at the train station, get the last train out. And they separate, and Rick waits at the train station, and Ilsa doesn't show. And she sends a note that really doesn't explain. And Rick is forced to leave. He heads to Morocco and Casablanca and opens a bar. And Morocco is a really important place because they have flights that go to Lisbon, and they have the flights from Lisbon go to the United States. And Morocco is where the French government has moved they have run away to Morocco, and they call it the French Vichy. And they are independent of the Germans, but they still kind of cooperate with them. And so he's there in Morocco, and tons of people come into Morocco. So that is our story. And you can see that already there are bad things that are happening. The worst, of course, is that Jews are being slaughtered in concentration camps. And on a more individual level, Rick and Ilsa aren't meant to be, and they are going through painful times. So let's look at this. We all have painful times in our own lives. And let's look at how Jewish thought progressed and try to understand it, because we try to understand it too, and it's not easy. So Jewish thought starts with Proverbs. And you heard the pithy sayings in Proverbs that shall be read. And it basically, they promise that if you do the right thing, good things will happen. And if you walk, your steps won't falter. If you run, you won't stumble. Yahweh doesn't let the just go hungry, but foils the craving of the wicked. An idle hand leads to poverty, and the hand of the industrious leads to wealth. Basically, what Proverbs says to us is that we have control over good things and bad things. And if we do good things will happen. And if we do bad things will happen. And in many ways, we use this today, just as they used it back then. Back then, they used these moral teachings to teach their children, to try to bring them up in morality. And don't we do it with our children too? How many of you have had a child come to you and say, but it's just not fair? Well, somehow they learned a doctrine of fairness. If you do the right thing will happen. The doctrine of fairness is Proverbs. And even in our minds as adults, we sometimes lapse back to that. Have you heard people say, well, the homeless are just lazy. If they worked, they wouldn't be homeless. It's problematic. Maybe sometimes that's true, but probably not most of the time. And that's the problem with the doctrine of Proverbs, is while sometimes it's true, there's so many times that it's not. It wasn't the Jews' fault that they were killed during World War II. It wasn't Rick and Ilsa's fault that they were kept apart. So Proverbs was the first try. The next try in Jewish thought was Job. And in Job, it's a myth. And whether you believe that it's possible for anybody to be perfect or not, it's important for you to believe in this myth that Job was perfect, that all that he had was because he was a good man. And suddenly, God makes a bet with the devil, and it changes. And so this is negating the Proverbs thought because he didn't do anything bad. It gives God the power. In Proverbs, we had the power for good and bad. Now in Job, God has it. God can control, and maybe God doesn't cause bad things to happen, but as he did with Job, he let Satan do that. And Satan back then was not the Satan of now. Satan was one of the divine council, and he was a persecutor. He was the person who was responsible for searching out individuals' wrongdoings and being accusers and so forth. So God let Satan do this, which means that God is in sole control. This is problematic as well. For what does it say about God? What does it say about a God that would let 6 million Jews be killed? What does it say about God that would let one of our children die or let us have cancer? What do these things say about God? And so this is a problematic response as well. Now, we still use this also. Have you ever had anyone come to you and say, well, God will never give you more than you can handle? That assumes that it's God who's causing it all. So that's Job. They tried again. Their final try was Ecclesiastes. It's written by a man named Kohelet. Kohelet was a ruler. He studied. It says in the beginning of Ecclesiastes that he studied good and bad. And the more he studied, the more he throws up his hands and he says, everything is Hebel. Now, Hebel is a Jewish word that means fog. It means vapor. It means breath. It's something that just dissipates and disappears, that doesn't last. And Kohelet believes that good and bad are really Hebel. They dissipate and they don't last. He writes in Ecclesiastes 3, which we read at many of our funerals, there's a time for everything, a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a plant, a time to uproot. You know the rest, you've heard it. He doesn't say why the times are or when, but he just says, they just happen and they don't necessarily last. Good things may happen. It won't last. Bad things may happen. It won't last. And he believes that what we need to do is to enjoy the good things when they come, because they won't last and they're a gift. And to know when the bad things come, because they too may not last. Now, what I find personally is a problem is when the good things come, I find myself feeling guilty about those who aren't having the good things, or knowing that they won't last, but he takes care of that in another part of we'll talk about that. There's a remedy for that. So his recommendation is when you have good times, enjoy the heck out of them, because they won't last and they're a gift. And when bad times come, that's where he now has some remedies, some things to help us to deal with those bad times. Long Xiao and Douglas Miller they believed that Hebel was a symbol for three things in Ecclesiastes. It was a symbol for transience, things that don't last. It was a symbol for insubstantiability, ephemeralness, things that we can't understand. And also that it was a symbol for foulness, because Kohelet talks about bad things and wicked people, like the Holocaust, and he calls them Hebel. So somehow this word Hebel is also for deep foulness or evil. So here I want to talk about what Ecclesiastes, what Kohelet gives us, because the first, in Proverbs, we had control of bad things. In Job, God had control. In Ecclesiastes, it feels like nobody has control, which is a scary place to be. Sometimes it's a whole lot easier to feel like we're controlling or God's controlling. But Kohelet gives us some things that we can do to help to deal with this fear. And there's four things. One is the sense that God loves us. God is the divine presence, whatever you call that, is love and is with us all the time. Now, frankly, when we're in really bad times, it's really hard to draw on that. That just seems way out there. So there's three other things, two of them that Kohelet adds and one that I have added. The next one is the sense of gratitude and accepting the good things. There are always good things. There is always nature. There is always love. And Kohelet says, Focus on those when you can, to give your heart, to give you strength and courage in the difficult times. So focus on the good things. The second thing he talks about is work as being a comfort for us. Our work is not just to make money to support ourselves and our families, but our work is also our work for justice. And so in the midst of all this uncertainty and all this evil and things that we can't control, we can continue our work for justice. And that's something that gives us comfort. The third and final one is that we can draw strength from each other. We're not meant to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune alone. And so we need to draw on each other. And we here at St. Andrews try to do that. Imperfectly, maybe, but we try to draw on each other's strength when we need it. And Kohelet encourages us to reach out. Well, actually, Kohelet doesn't encourage us. This is the one that I have added, because I think this is what really can also help us in dealing with this uncertainty. And I think much of the Christian New Testament talks about this and talks about community and how important community is. So we've got these 4 things: divine love, gratefulness for the good gifts, our work, and companionship. And I'd like to go back now to Casablanca and talk about what's happened and then the last scene, because I think it illustrates these things for us. Rick is in his saloon in Casablanca, and who should show up but Ilsa and her husband? And they need help. They need help getting out of Casablanca. They need to take a plane to Lisbon and then to the United States. The Nazis are after her husband, Victor, and the Nazi Major Strasser has followed them to Casablanca. It's breathing down their necks. And so it turns out that Rick is the one person who can get them out. He has letters of transit that can allow them to leave. Ilsa comes to him in the middle of the night and explains what happened. She explains that she was ready to come to the train station, and she heard that her husband was outside of Paris and was still alive. And she had to go to him and help him. But she couldn't let Rick know because her husband's life was so in danger, no one could know. So he now understands. She also explains that she loves him with a love that's different than that she has for her husband. And now they're all left with this situation. Well, in the final scene, it takes place in the airport, and there's basically the same 5 characters. 4 of them are there initially. There's Ilsa and Rick and Victor and Captain Renault. And Ilsa and Victor get on the plane. And Rick and Captain Renault are standing there waiting for the plane to take off when Major Strasser shows up, who Captain Renault has secretly let know that this was happening because he's always playing both sides. And Rick shoots Major Strasser to keep the plane from taking off. The plane takes off, and Captain Renault tells his men who arrive, "Oh, someone's killed Major Strasser, round up the usual suspects." He protects Rick. Okay, so let's look at this from the point of view of Ecclesiastes. First of all, it's a foggy night. Fog is the metaphor for Hebel, for us not knowing, for the situation in life. And then we have the situation, we know that divine love is with all of these characters, but they probably don't feel it. So that's the first. The second thing that we can do in times of difficulty is gratefulness. And now that Rick knows why this happened, he and Ilsa can be grateful for their love. And he says, remember, we always have Paris. And she goes ahead and gets on the plane with Victor, which is part of the third one, our righteous work. She needed to go with Victor. They needed to go to keep the fight. Rick needed to provide the way for them to leave. And the captain needed to protect Rick. So that was the righteous work. And then the final one is drawing strength from companionship. And here it comes out in that famous line where Rick says to Captain Renault, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. So maybe the story of Casablanca can help you to remember the things that we can do when bad things happen. We can focus on divine love, which is always with us, whether we feel it or not. We can be grateful for the good things that are still there, are still happening. We can focus on the work for justice that is in front of us. And we can draw strength from companionship. These are my thoughts on why bad things happen. Now you'll have a moment to focus on your thoughts.